Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim, because I'm excited to have our listeners experience the guest that we have on today. He's a fascinating person, makes you laugh, makes you just shake your head in disbelief. And Tim, I am shaking my head in disbelief because you haven't told me how you're doing today.
Thanks a lot for asking, Lance. I am doing great. I am really excited about our recent couple of conversations with Matt Cox of Inside True Crime. One of those conversations was here, and we're going to play it in just a moment. We had a lot of fun talking to Matt about his life, his history in crime, in actually committing fraud and being incarcerated for 13 years. And then, Lance, we also spoke with Matt on his show called Inside True Crime, and you can find that at youtube.com/Inside True Crime, or you can just go to InsideTrueCrime.com.
And something that makes this conversation very unique is that Matt ultimately takes full responsibility for the crimes that he committed as a mortgage broker. It was bank fraud and mortgage fraud, and he borrowed millions of dollars. He was caught. His prison sentence was 26 years, which he did 13 years of. He takes full responsibility for it, says if he had the opportunity to go back and do it all again, he was like, of course I wouldn't. It makes no sense why I would do it again, but he loves talking about it, and he does it in such this animated way that you can't help but just find him endearing. Because he's done his time and he's essentially paid his debt to society. He tells his story, but he also has people come on his show to tell their story, and it is educational. And he's written a bunch of books. He took the stories of the people that he was incarcerated with, sat down with them, had them tell him their stories so he could write the book as a way to advise people on the less glamorous side of being a criminal.
He reminds me of that movie Catch Me If You Can, Lance, and the character Frank Abagnale, where he could kind of like figure out any situation, and the FBI had no choice but to like get him to work with them to help plug loopholes and holes in things like that. I feel like Matt would be useful in that realm too. He's got a very successful YouTube page, and he seems very content in doing that, and I appreciate what he does. He's a great storyteller. I enjoy talking with him.
And I think everybody is going to enjoy listening to this and taking what they will from it. But Tim, if I wanted to listen to this with no ads, what would I do?
Great question, Lance. You could actually go to crawlspace.supportingcast.fm and you could sign up for our ad-free service. We're also coming to Apple subscriptions pretty soon, but I'm not sure if that's going to be available by the time you're hearing this, but it will be soon. And you can find it ad-free there as well, Lance. Please follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Welcome to the podcast, Matt Cox. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you guys having me on.
We appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story, and I don't know where to start with you. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and really looking forward to hearing your story and how you got to be where you are today.
Ask away.
Okay, well, first, let's talk about your show, Inside True Crime.
I mean, I have a YouTube channel. It's like Matt Cox, Inside True Crime. When I was locked up, I started writing guys true crime stories, and then everybody was telling me you should start a podcast. So I got out and I started the YouTube channel. And so I tell guys stories. You know, I'll get guests and they come on and I just talk to them about their story, their crime stories. It's not always crime stories though, but it's 99% of the stuff is crime related. So I think I've had one or two guests on that maybe weren't directly related to crime. I had Laura on with crime cleanup the other day. That's one of the things that like, it's kind of like an offshoot of crime. You know, she's not a criminal, but she cleans up the crime scenes. And then, of course, I interview guys that, you know, bank robbers, drug dealers, try and interview guys that have what I consider unique crimes, because I'm not that interested in violent crimes. I just have kind of a disdain for it, I think. But periodically, I'll talk to somebody. Like I talked to Jane
Borowski, yes.
And I have written stories about guys where there were a murder involved in their story, but not that they didn't commit the murder. And it kind of all started when I was in prison, and I had a hefty sentence, and it's like, what do you do? I didn't want to play softball, and I didn't want to learn how to be a chef. And, like there's only so much stuff you can do in prison. I didn't want to learn how to play the guitar. So it was like, what do you do? And these guys in prison, they just had these amazing stories. So I wrote my own personal memoir, and then I wrote a memoir for a guy named Ephraim Deveroli. Did you ever see the movie War Dogs?
He's the gun runner.
Yeah, Jonah Hill plays Ephraim Deveroli. And so I was locked up with Ephraim Deveroli, and I wrote his memoir. And then, of course, other guys start writing memoirs, and I got some guys in Rolling Stone magazine, and I started optioning their life rights, and it was something to do, and it carried on to me getting out. It's like, it's going to sound horrible. I enjoyed crime and crime stories. And, the judge was very, very, very clear that I can't commit crimes anymore. And so I decided that this was a way for me to kind of, I hate to say keep my fingers in it, but, kind of explore those interests without actually having to go back to prison.
Did someone in prison suggest this to you?
When I went to prison, Facebook had just come out. So I'd never been on Facebook. I'd never been on YouTube. I didn't know what a podcast was. It didn't become a thing till maybe about 5 or 6 years just before I was getting out. I got out in 2019. So about 4 or 5 years prior to me getting out, guys were coming up to me going, I just read an article about a podcast, and, you should think about doing a podcast when you get out. And I was like, okay. Like, I don't even know what that is. And they explain it to me because they just come in. They're like, yeah, bro, like true crime is huge in podcasts. Well, I don't know what a podcast is. And they would explain to me, it's kind of like the old radio series, they tell like a little bit of the story, and then a week later they tell a little bit more. I go, like a TV show. They go, right, but without the TV part. So I got out, and that's what happened. I got out, and I looked into it, and I said, oh wow, I could definitely do this. I didn't think anybody would be that interested, but you have to think too, compared to when I went into prison and the money I was making was so far removed from the person I was when I came out of prison. I was concerned about paying my basic bills, but I wasn't concerned about making a whole bunch of money. If I could do this and I like it and I enjoy my life, I don't mind if I have to live in someone's spare room, and I'll just do this podcast and I'll write stories, and that's good enough.
Are you trying to tell me that you make less money podcasting than defrauding banks and forging mortgages?
Shocking. It's not the podcast that makes it. It's the ancillary benefits that really pay my bill, like selling books, like all these other things that kind of happen because of the podcast. But yeah, listen, I'm thrilled to be able to pay my bills. Like, I genuinely thought I was going to be working at McDonald's, living in someone's spare room the rest of my life. And I was okay with that. Like, that's how far I had dropped, compared to what I was used to. And I was just like, but I can be happy. As opposed to going, before I went to prison, millions of dollars, but I just wasn't really happy.
Tell us about when you went to prison. What did you go to prison for, and how long did you spend in prison?
Well, what I went to prison for was I had owned a mortgage company, and we were doing fraud, a little fraud here, a little fraud. Like in most, even today, everybody's like, oh, well, it's not like that anymore. Yeah, it is. In the early 2000s, you come in my office, maybe you made $80,000, but to get the loan, you needed to make $95,000. So I'd change your W-2s and your pay stubs, and I'd put them through underwriting, and they wouldn't catch it, and you'd get the loan, and I'd get a nice broker fee. That went on for a year or so, 2-3 years. And then eventually I get caught. I didn't get caught for that. I got caught for basically another scam, a little scheme. I end up losing my mortgage license. I'm a felon. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go sell used cars, this didn't work out, I decide to kind of lean into the whole fraud thing. What I decide to do is to just completely start committing fraud, like blatant fraud, like run a scam. And the initial scam was I started creating what's called synthetic identities. I was able to get Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers to children that don't exist. So I'd make a fake birth certificate, fake shop record, go in, they'd issue me a Social Security card for like a 10-month-old child. I'd then get secured credit cards in that child's name, make the payments, and in 6 months, I would have 700 credit scores. So now, this synthetic identity can buy houses and get more credit cards. And so I would buy 5 houses in their name for like $50,000, but I would record the value of those homes at like $200,000. And so I've got 5 or 6 or 7 different, more like it was around 10 or 11 in the end. But I start making these fake people buying houses and recording the values of those houses in one area, an area of Tampa called Ybor City. And so what happened is the value of those homes shoot up to $250,000, even though I bought them for 40 or 50,000. So now they're worth 200,000 on an appraisal. I then go back to the bank and refinance the house and get a loan for 200,000 or 190,000 on this $220,000 house and make a few payments and let the house go into foreclosure. So I borrowed $11.5 million over the course of, I don't know, like 18 months, maybe 2 years in these names. The banks never had any idea that they were getting scammed. But eventually, I had a friend who was a sheriff's deputy who comes to me one day and says, hey, he used to date a girl in the Tampa Police Department, and she was on a task force that was investigating me. And he said, the FBI is going to come arrest you in a couple of days. I'm just like, that's crazy. So I took off on the run with the girl I was dating, which was a huge mistake. But we didn't have much money. We had like 80 grand. Even though we had millions of dollars, you just can't walk in the bank and say, hey, I need you to give me $500,000. So it took about a day or so to get out. I got out like 80 grand, took off on the run, went to Atlanta, rented someone's house, satisfied the loan on his house, and then borrowed $450,000 in that guy's name.
Was this a stressful time, or was it more like you had a lot of adrenaline going?
I think that the problem is that because I knew how mortgages and the banking system worked, I was super confident. Like if I know what's on my credit report, I've already pulled it multiple times. I built this credit report. I didn't steal someone's identity, so I know what's on the credit report. I'm the one who applied for it. This is a synthetic person I built. So if I go in the bank and I say, hey, I need you to pull my credit, I know everything that you're going to see. Like I know credit inside and out. So if I say, hey, here's where I work, I know that when you call, you're going to get the phone number and you're going to get the answering service, and then they're going to reroute the call, and I have somebody that's going to verify. Like I know how everything works. So I didn't mind walking into the bank. So I wasn't worried. And everybody's always like, were you scared? No, I wasn't scared. I was scared a few times. I got arrested, brought to the police station and questioned once or twice, but I talked my way out of it.
How do you talk I can't talk my way out of a speeding ticket. Like, how do you, if I was trying to do that and I got arrested, I'd be like, that's it.
No. I didn't break.
Slap the cuffs on.
I can't break. I couldn't break when they're still calling you. Like I got handcuffed one time and arrested as a guy named Gary Sullivan. They kept calling me Gary Sullivan, Mr. Sullivan. So where I'm not saying anything until you start saying Matt Cox. Like they kept saying Gary Sullivan. I'm like, that's right. Yes. What can I do for you? And I just answered their questions and I spun it a little bit so it didn't look like I had done anything wrong. But after the 400,000, I ended up going from Georgia to South Carolina. I borrowed like $1.3 million. That's where I got arrested in the bank. And then I got caught in the bank and I convinced there was 2 sheriffs arrested me. They called the detective and a detective came down to talk to me. And he said, hey, Mr. Sullivan, what's going on? And you have to understand, by this point, I wasn't using the synthetic identities anymore. At this point, been on the run for about a year. I was interviewing homeless people to get their identities. Like if I stole your identity, there's a good chance you're going to figure it out. But if I stole a homeless person's identity, I can go into the DMV and get a driver's license as that homeless person. I can get a passport as that homeless person. I can buy a car, a house, everything. If I interview a homeless guy in Alabama and I get a driver's license in his name in North Carolina and I get pulled over, there's no way he's ever going to figure it out. He didn't report his identity as being stolen. I'd interviewed a guy in Las Vegas, a homeless guy in Las Vegas. And I was in a bank in Wachovia in South Carolina, in a Wachovia bank. I had borrowed a $1.3 million on 2 houses. And I was in the bank pulling cash out of the bank. A couple sheriff's deputies walk up behind me, grab my arms and pull them behind my back and handcuff me. And so they walk me in the back and they sit me down in the manager's office. They say, Mr. Sullivan, we're detaining you until the detective gets here. And at this point, I knew the FBI was looking for me. I knew the marshals were looking for me. And so I remember thinking that the FBI was showing up. Like I didn't know what the difference between a detective and an agent and investigator. Like I didn't know that. So I was thinking, okay, well, the FBI's coming to get me. And I don't know why he's calling me Mr. Sullivan. But then the detective walks in and he says, hi, Mr. Sullivan, something's up. They're not arresting me because they know who I am. So what ends up happening is he says, look, Wachovia Bank said that you're running some kind of a scam. And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah. He said you have 3 mortgages on 1 house. And I go, is that illegal? And he looked at me and he said, you know, I don't know. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm walking out of here. I'm going to walk out of here. And the truth is, honestly, I had about 6 mortgages on that house. They had only found 3 of them. See, what I would do is I would get a house, and then I'd convince the owner to owner finance it, or I'd rent the house, and I'd steal the person's identity, and then I would satisfy any loans on the home. I would go down to public records and record a satisfaction of mortgage from the mortgage companies. So if you looked in public records, it looked like there was no mortgages on the house. And then I would go to multiple banks and close multiple loans on the house so quickly that they couldn't catch it. And that's typically the way it worked. Unfortunately, Wachovia had caught it.
Is that illegal to have 6 mortgages on one house?
It is the way I did it. The thing is, at that time, you could have 5 mortgages, 6 mortgages. Like now, different states have different rules, and there's the Dodd-Frank Act came out. But at this time, I could have 5 mortgages, 6 mortgages. And so what I explained to them was, look, I've got a first mortgage, a second mortgage, and a home equity line of credit. Wachovia gave me a first mortgage. Their loan officer told me she could get me a second mortgage. She had a friend that worked at SunTrust Bank. They got me a second mortgage. The person at SunTrust Bank said she could get me a HELOC, and she sent me to her other friend. She got me a HELOC, and that's why I have 3 loans. What did I do wrong? And of course, Wachovia knows this isn't true. He's screaming, that's not true. Our loan officer wouldn't have done that. I kind of told the officer, I said, well, what makes more sense? That a guy that works for a labor company, because that's who I said I worked for, and I handed him my business card. Because by this point, I'd say, can you take the cuffs off me? He's like, yeah, okay, yeah. When they take the cuffs off me, I said, does it make more sense that me, a guy who works at a labor company, I hand him my business card, convinced 3 banks to lend him $500,000 because they'd only found $500,000 worth, or that a bunch of loan officers got together in order to lend me enough money so that I could, because I told them I was rehab houses so they could make a broker fee. Which one sounds more reasonable? I said, bro, I wouldn't know how to do this if I tried. I said, so if something's wrong, it's a problem at the bank. Well, the guy at Wachovia, I remember the guy at Wachovia goes, he's lying. That's not true. He goes, look at his ID. His ID starts with 000. I had actually gone into the DMV in South Carolina and got a driver's license, and their IDs start with 000. He was in California. So when he said that, the detective went, no, it's not a fake ID. This is Gary Sullivan. I've already run him through NCIC. I've ran him through the database. This is him. This is his driver's license. And our IDs start with 000. And I remember I leaned into him and I go, bro, come on, man. Now I'm not Gary Sullivan. I go, what are we doing here? And he goes, I know, Gary. I know. I'm sorry, give me another few more minutes. And I go, this is crazy. So I'm now offended. It was so bad that I started to feel bad for him, because it's like everything he was saying was absolutely correct. And, and I was just like, yeah. I'm thinking inside, yeah. Oh, that's how they found that out. Yeah, that's good. He's right. And then he's looking at me, and of course I'm saying, what? That's crazy. How is that even possible? And he's like, I'm like, I don't know what happened. You got to talk to the loan officer. And I said, sounds to me like they've got a problem at the bank. And I remember the detective says to the guy at Wachovia, yeah, listen, I think you guys have a problem at the bank. And this guy, I think he was going to have like a heart attack. And he desperately wanted them to arrest me. And he said, look, I can't arrest him. He's like, you haven't won. I don't even know what to charge him with. He came in, he applied for some loans, and you lent him the money. Like, you're not saying that what he gave you was fraudulent. They're not saying the W-2s and pay stubs are fake. They're not saying anything's wrong. The one thing you said was he's using a fake ID, and it's not a fake ID. He was like, yeah, I'm going to have him go downtown with me to the police station, fill out a police report, and I'm going to release him until you guys can come in and file a complaint or something. I do. I actually get up and I go and I follow him to the police station, go inside and I fill out a police report. And he says, Gary, can you wait in the hallway? Because they have like cubicles. And I went into his cubicle and we filled out the police report. And so he says, can you wait in the hallway for me? Because he had to get the paperwork signed off on. So I go in the hallway and I'm standing in the hallway and they had all the wanted posters in the hallway. And I'm looking at the wanted posters and my Secret Service's most wanted poster was in the hallway. And I remember it was the only one in color. And he walks up, like, as I'm seeing, I'm like, holy shit. He walks up behind me and he's like, hey, Gary, you ready to go? I was like, absolutely. And so he walked me right out of the police station. And I got in my car. Just before I left, I remember he said, look, we have a lot of questions about this whole thing. I talked to the district attorney and she's looking into it. And he's just don't leave town. Okay. And he kind of chuckled and I chuckled and I said, I'm not leaving. I own 2 houses here. Like, where am I going to go? And he's like, okay, just make sure. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Got in my car, went to 2 more banks, got out more money, and then I took off and I never went back. I left like $600,000 or $700,000 in the bank in South Carolina. I actually went to Houston with my girlfriend. We got into an argument, broke up with her. I drove back to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was staying to pick up my car. And when I was in Charlotte, I went to where my apartment complex was. I got my car, drove kind of catty corner a little bit down the street from the apartment complex, which is in downtown Charlotte. And I went to a Starbucks. And when I walked in the Starbucks, 2 leasing agents from my apartment complex there. And I remember they kept looking at me and they're talking and they're looking at me and they're talking. And I remember thinking, because it was like the 4th or the 5th and your rent's due on the 1st. And I remember thinking like I hadn't paid my rent because obviously I had gotten caught and I was basically vacating the area. I was planning on going to live in Houston, in Texas, but I got into the fight with the girlfriend, came back to get my car. And so they're kind of arguing back and forth. And I thought, boy, they're really upset about this whole rent thing. So then one of them leaves and goes toward the apartment complex. And I get my coffee and the guy gets his coffee. And he's standing there staring at me. And I walk out of the Starbucks and I get in my car and put my coffee away. I'm playing with the radio, put my seatbelt on. And he's standing. I remember the guy was standing on the sidewalk just staring at me. And he had a tray of coffees. And all of a sudden he's looking up and down and all of a sudden he starts screaming, he's right here, he's right here, he's right here. And I look in the rearview mirror and there's 2 guys running down the sidewalk toward my car. I hit the gas and boom, I take off on the run. I take off, right down the street and I leave them, sounds more dramatic, but the truth is I was already going to leave. You know what I'm saying? I mean, had checked. It's not like I raced in front of cars. I mean, it'd make a great reenactment. I'd probably slide sideways and everything, but still, I was like already leaving and he starts screaming and these guys were running. And I found out later that was 2 U.S. Marshals. They had tracked me back from South Carolina to Charlotte and they were questioning the staff at the apartment complex when these 2 people went across the street to get coffee. So like the marshal, that's why the one person went to go get them. Ran in the office and said, this guy's across the street. So I took off. It's funny. I drove like a mile away, went to a homeless shelter and surveyed 4 more guys. I mean, I got, I had them take the survey. So I wouldn't tell them I was stealing their identity. I would tell them I was taking a survey for the Salvation Army to determine where we place our next homeless facility. And I said, it's a survey. It pays $20 cash right now. 17 questions, takes all of 4 or 5 minutes. And they would say, oh, you got cash right now? Yep, cash right now. I show them the cash and they go, yeah, what do you need to know? Name, date of birth, mother's maiden name, where were you born? What's your social security number? Have you ever had a passport? Have you ever had a driver's license? If so, in what state? You ever been in the military? Do you receive social security, disability? And I would just go through the whole thing. And when I got enough information, I'd say, okay, here's your $20. Thank you. And that would give me enough information. I could go online and I could order a copy of their birth certificate, a copy of their social security card. I could order their high school transcripts. I could register to vote as them. And then I could get that information and go into the local DMV and get a driver's license.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors. And now we're back to the program.
I would like to take the opportunity to maybe go back a little bit and introduce the audience to how you became a criminal in this manner. You said that you were avoiding your car getting repossessed and you were working construction, and I feel like that's so relatable to people because I can remember in my 20s, like, I can't make my car payment, I can't pay my bills, the job sucks, I'm just trying to like make ends meet. The majority of people come to a moment in their life where they're like, what do I do? Do I actually commit to the idea of being a criminal, or do I just keep doing this making ends meet lifestyle, parking my car in a different area each night so it doesn't get repoed?
Right. I've done that.
Can you take us back to that moment? Here's the tipping point. Here's where I'm going to commit to this.
I was struggling so badly. And the girl I was dating had gone to work for a subprime lender, a mortgage company. And she was like, you have to do this. Like, I was working construction. I have a college degree. I got my license, my insurance license. So I was working as an insurance adjuster. I got laid off twice. I was having a hard time. I'm working construction. I can barely pay my bills. I'm behind on my car payment. We're behind on the mortgage. It was like, this is just a bad situation. So she was like, you have to come work at this company. You would be amazing at it. And so I go there. I immediately started putting together deals. And I had a client and I walk in. I remember I went into my manager's office. I put together a whole file, got the appraisal, got the W-2s, pay stubs. Like, I've got a qualified client that wants to buy a house. She has the money in her bank. Like, everything's great. My manager was looking through the file, and I remember she took one piece of paper and put it to the side and then looked through everything. She goes, this looks great. I go, okay. And she said, except for this one document, it's a verification of rent. And she said, your borrower in the last 24 months has been 30 days late on her rent payment. And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, she had a 30 days late, which she caught up, but she was 30 days late. And she said, so you don't have a deal anymore. It's over. And I was like, oh my God, well, what do I do? And she said, I remember she pulled out the bottle of white out, I don't even know if they still make these, the liquid one where you, and she was like, and then she said, she's kind of like, as she's telling me this, she's like, I go, well, so what do I do? And she already knows what to do. She goes, hands it to me. She goes, white it out, make a copy, stick it in the file. Underwriting will never catch it. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, they'll call up and they'll just ask the person at the property management company they will ask that person, did you fill out this form? She's going to say yes. And they'll say, okay. They won't say, well, they won't ask her the questions again. She goes, there's almost no chance they'll catch it. I was like, well, that's fraud. And I go, I could go to jail. And she goes, no, she said, if they catch it, you might get fired if they think you're involved. She goes, but that's the worst that would happen. She goes, nobody's calling the FBI. And I trusted her. I was like, okay. So I did it, was terrified for about 3 days. Underwriting called and said, your borrower is approved. And 2 days later, we closed. And I got a check for $3,500. There's something called the fraud. It's called the fraud triangle. Most people will commit fraud if they have they're motivated to do it. They have the means to do it, and they have they have whatever the opportunity to do it. Like, if you're in the right spot and you have the ability to do it and you need to do it, most people will do it. And that was that moment for me. And I always say, well, I needed the money, and I did need the money. But then I always go, okay, that's great. That's a cop out, because 6 months later, you had plenty of money. It's because 6 months later, then I just started doing it with everybody that walked through the door. So 6 months later, I got tons of money. Why are you still doing it? And then a year later, I had, I'm worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have rental properties. I'm doing great, but I'm still doing it. So I think I just became good at it, and I really liked doing it. And it gave me a huge thrill. And it's just arrogance on my part. I just kept going. And you can see it even now. I love talking about it.
What happened to the manager? Did she go on a criminal spree as well?
Yeah, she went and opened her own place, and she eventually ended up getting in trouble too. And she went to jail. I think she did 30 days or 60 days or something. Not much.
Can you tell us when you started getting caught by the banks, how you would return money to banks and they didn't contact the FBI?
I mean, it depends on which time. Like, that happened quite a few times. So, I got called one time. It was millions of dollars, like millions. All I did was agree that if it ever caught up with them, it was a lender called a Pinnacle Bank Corp. I remember, and they were out of Chicago. I remember telling them, look, if it ever catches up with them, I would help them get rid of the houses. So because by that point they'd already sold, they had $1 million in their pipeline and they'd already sold $1 million. So ethically, what they should have done was contacted Household Bank and said, look, we just sold you $1 million in bad loans. They would have to buy that money, those loans back. They're not going to do that. They didn't want to do that. So they just said, look, you messed up. You guys messed up. Don't do it again. And if it comes back on us, help us get rid of it. And I was like, absolutely. But another time they caught one of the synthetic identities. This guy's name was, I remember it was Alan Duncan. We bought 4 or 5 houses in his name. I was taking care of so many properties at that point, right? So we did like 109 properties in Ybor City. So I'm making a lot of mortgage payments, even though periodically they're going into foreclosure. You're still making 20 or 30 at all, maybe 40 at all times. I had bought a house, gave a buddy of mine who was helping with the scam, gave him a bunch of money and says, make sure you make the payments. And in maybe 4 months from now, we'll stop paying. The very first payment he didn't make. So the bank figured it out. It was South Star Bank in Georgia. They called the loan officer and asked the loan officer if she'd ever met Alan Duncan. And so she called the account rep, and the account rep said, well, apparently this guy doesn't even exist. Like, they've done a full investigation. So I go to the office and I call up South Star Bank and I tell them, the receptionist, like, hey, my name's Alan Duncan. I need to talk to like the president of the bank. And they were like, well, he's in a meeting. I go, trust me, he knows who I am. He wants to talk to me. Sure enough, like, we're talking about 2 minutes later, bam, he comes on the phone along with their head of security and their lawyer. He says they were having a meeting about me at that moment. They're like, look, it's odd, Mr. Duncan, because, your social security number was only recently issued, maybe a year or two ago. And honestly, it was probably only not even a year old. And he said, we've contacted this particular, a bank, you don't have a bank account there. We contacted, like across the board, they've pulled a 4506 from the IRS. They're like, your taxes were never filed. Like, it was just across the board. They'd been doing some digging. And I was like, okay. And they're like, what do you have to say with that? And I was like, I mean, sounds like there's some issues. I can get the payment in the mail. I can overnight it, have it there tomorrow. He's like, oh, we're way past that. I said, well, what do you guys want? And they said, well, we don't want anything. We just thought we'd talk to you. We're going to turn this into the FBI. And I said, well, let's not get crazy. I said, why don't I just let me pay you back? And they said, and the problem is, I'd been in this situation before and they were very cocky. I said, well, aren't you guys concerned about getting your money back? And they said, well, we'll get our money back when we foreclose on the house. And that's when I was like, oh, I understand. You think the house is worth, $180,000 or something. And I said, the house is only worth about 40 or 50 grand. It's a crack shack. Like, this thing is in the middle of hell. They're like, no, we have an appraisal. And I said, right. Do you have it in front of you? And he goes, yeah. I go, open it up. And I said, right, comparable sale number 1, which sold for $190,000. I said, that's owned by a guy named Lee Black. Comparable sale number 2 is owned by a guy named Brandon Green. Comparable sale number 3 is owned by a guy named, I think it was like James Red or something. And I explained exactly what I did. I bought these houses for $40,000, recorded the value at $190 and $210 and $185. I said, so that my house would appraise for this, so I could borrow the money from you, make a few payments, and let it go into foreclosure. I said, because that's what I do. And they were just like, oh my God. And I said, so what's going to happen, fellas, is that if you don't let me pay you back and not call the FBI, what's going to happen is this: you call the FBI, you're going to foreclose on the house. And by the time you foreclose on the house and resell it, you're going to have lost $100,000. I'm going to assume that you are trying to make a decision that's in the best interest of your bank and your bank customers, right? Like, you have a fiduciary responsibility to make good decisions for the stockholders or owner of that bank. And they were like, right. I said, so let me just pay you back. So we worked out a deal where I actually cut them a check for, I want to say I owed them like $140,000 or $150,000. I actually cut them a check for like $150,000. That's not the only time that happened though. I've got caught several times and did the same thing. I just paid them back. And I always thought, well, they'll call the bank, they'll call the FBI anyway. But they never did. Not one time did anybody ever call the FBI. when I did that.
I mean, in a sense, are you just kind of working their greed against themselves or their initiative to make a profit against them? Because you just laid it out so plainly.
Not just that, I remember they specifically said that the head of security or their head of their fraud department was former FBI. They were saying, well, when the FBI catches you, we'll get our money back. And I was like, you'll never get your money back. I don't exist. The money's gone. And even their head of the fraud department told the bank president and the lawyer, he was like, listen, he's right. You'll be lucky to see pennies on the dollar if you recover anything at all. That's if we even catch this guy. Like, look what he just did. And he told you he does it all the time. Like, we'd be lucky to catch him. What I was really thinking was this. Most banks, even if they're 100% legitimate, they do not want the FBI showing up looking through their files. It's disruptive. It's frightening to the employees. It doesn't look good if it ends up in the newspaper. Like, we don't want to be involved in this. So why would they call the FBI and then say, hey, we got our money back? And then the FBI comes in and says, great, we want to pull all your files from this mortgage company and this lender, all the title company files. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, why do that? So is it greed, or do we want 6 FBI officers in our bank for the next 2 weeks or 2 months? And I think it just becomes like, hey, it's easier. Let's just get our money back and it'll be somebody else's problem.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors. And now we're back to the program.
Is this a victimless crime, in your opinion?
I ran a variety of different scams. In some of them, I feel like, yeah, they're victimless. So the scams that I ran while I was in Tampa were just geared toward the title companies, insurance policies, and the banks. But when I was on the run, it's like the gloves were off. So at that point, I was in a bad spot, and I actually would just go straight to a homeowner. Let's say you put your house on the market. I come to you and I say, look, I want you to owner finance your house. I'll give you $30,000 down. You owner finance your house. And you say, okay, well, then this is a very simple way. Even if you had a mortgage on the house, you can do what's called a wraparound mortgage. So you've got a mortgage and you still have a mortgage. Your original mortgage is still in the house, even though the house is in my name. Well, I would then go downtown and create a satisfaction of mortgage for your original mortgage with Bank of America or whoever. And your wraparound mortgage, I would satisfy that one also. So now I own the house free and clear. I then go to 4 or 5 different banks and borrow multiple mortgages at the same time. I'd get, let's say, $1 million or whatever on the house, and I'd pull that money out in cash over the next month or two, and then I'd leave. Now, you could say, well, wait a minute, you didn't take any money from the homeowner. I actually gave the homeowner $30,000. Here's the problem. Now those mortgages that I borrowed against your house or the house that you lent, you are now financing to me, those banks start to try and foreclose on the house. You have to go out and you get a lawyer. That lawyer then has to contact those banks and explain there was a fraud committed, show them the police report, show them all of the documentation. And then they say, okay, I get it now. I understand there was a fraud committed. And then they make a claim against the title company. Then the title company policies pays them back. Here's who doesn't get reimbursed: the original homeowner. If he pays $10,000 to a lawyer, he doesn't get his $10,000 back. And let's say the few people that this happened with were a doctor and it's like a doctor, 2 lawyers, and a CPA. Did I destroy their lives? No, but I probably definitely destroyed their peace of mind. Being burglarized, is that a big deal? Not really. I wasn't in the house. I came in, they took my TV, they took a bunch of my stuff. Like, I have insurance, I'll get it all back. The problem is, do you ever really feel safe in your house again? So it's like the money, it's like, okay, I don't care about the money because I'm pretty sure that's not their gripe. I think their gripe with me would be, I don't feel safe. Like, this was my home. Like, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, their biggest mistake was just crossing my path. Like, they didn't do anything wrong. They can't even look at themselves and say, well, I was too trusting. No, you weren't. I was a perfect candidate to buy your house. I'm a clean-cut white guy who's been on his job 5 years and has perfect credit. Like, they didn't do anything wrong in those specific cases. And there's not a lot of them. I think I have 4 individual victims that I owe less than $30,000 to. And I honestly don't think they would even complain about the money. Like the one of the couples that this was a doctor, I gave them $25,000 at closing. They spent $10,000 on a lawyer. So they're certainly not upset about, and then they got the house back and resold it for the same amount of money. They're not concerned about the money. I'm sure they're concerned about, hey, this scumbag definitely made us feel, absolutely, shattered our peace of mind and made us feel like, like victims, like, vulnerable. So yeah, in that case, yeah, definitely victims.
You're not on to promote anything right now. We're just having this conversation, and you said that you enjoy talking about it, and it's been an incredible story. I wonder if, given the choice, would do things differently. Having gone to prison, you've written so many books, and it's very educational. You don't come across as like I'm trying to teach a lesson here, but I feel like you kind of do in that tone, that you're relatable in that tone. Would you do it differently?
Listen, because I think you learn more through entertainment. I probably learned more watching Schindler's List and Enemies at the Gate about World War II than I did anything else. Like that sparked my interest. And the next thing you know, I can tell you all kinds of stuff about World War II now. I watch documentaries and everything because they're entertaining. I feel like that's a way I learn. And as far as me, would I do anything different? I mean, bro, come on. Like I went to prison for 13 years. Like I love these guys that are like, oh, I wouldn't change anything. And you'll hear these criminals, that these guys that will get out of prison be like, well, I wouldn't change anything because it made me the man I am today. Are you serious? I did 13 years in prison. I would go back and absolutely make vastly different decisions if I could. All of those decisions that led me to prison were all based on my pride. They were just stupid, selfish, prideful, narcissistic decisions that in the end cost me 13 years. If I even think about it, my mother had to come see me every 2 weeks in federal prison in a visitation room. Like she didn't deserve that. Like I wasn't there to raise my son. He didn't deserve that. My father died when I was in prison. I mean, I would change so many things if I could go back. I'd love to be that guy that says, no, it made me the man I am today. Well, the man I am today is 53 years old, starting his life over. That sucks. And I can't even complain. Like I can't even bitch about it because I had it coming. It's not like you can sit in prison and say, well, I shouldn't be here. No, they made the right call. Like this is where I'm supposed to be. So I can't even complain and say, oh, it wasn't right. They shouldn't have sent me to prison. No, they hit it on the head.
It is a great answer, and it's really amazing that you take full accountability for the actions, and what you've done after you've gotten out of prison, I think, is really remarkable in the short time that it's been, only a couple of years through a pandemic. So that's really remarkable. You were talking about these stories and sensationalizing, and which I don't think you did, but I just wanted to run a story by you the other day, and this is pretty comparable to what you did in your past. But the other day I was driving my car, and it's got an expired inspection sticker on it. And I stopped at this construction site, and there was a detail cop there, and I was just sweating because I knew he was going to see that inspection sticker, and he was going to pull me over. And I drove by him, he waved me through, and I was like, I just got past you, man. I just got past you. It's close, right? It's close to sitting in a police station with your FBI wanted poster.
Yeah, that might be. What's funny? I had stolen a guy's identity one time. And of course, I would take someone's identity. I'd live as that person. So I'd always have like one identity that this is my legit, and I'm not doing any scams in this identity. So of course, this guy, his name was Michael Eckert. Got a driver's license in his name in North Carolina, bought a car in his name, got an apartment in his name, got credit cards in his name. I got 3 tickets driving as him. And I ended up having to go to traffic school because I was afraid if I got one more ticket, I was going to lose his license. Like I can't lose this guy's license. And people would always say that. They'd say, well, weren't you worried about getting pulled over? I was like, well, no, like I'm not driving around with a dead body in the trunk and a broken tail light. Like when I got pulled over, I've got a valid driver's license. I have full coverage insurance. The car is registered in my name. All of my emissions are everything's up to date. All my inspections, like the cop would pull up and he'd say, you know how fast you're going? I'd be like, it depends on how long you were behind me. Like I had it up to about 95 at one point. What'd you get me at? And the look on their face would be like, what the hell? Like, I'm not concerned about talking my way out of the ticket because I'm not going to be this guy in 6 months. My problem was after the third ticket, then it's like, oh, wow, I may not make it a few more months. Like I might lose this guy's license. I got to go to traffic school. So yeah, I wasn't never worried at something like that. When I got grabbed in the bank, I was definitely concerned.
Yeah, tense moment, Matt. And yeah, again, you're a great storyteller. This has been a really interesting conversation. I really think our audience will like this. And where can our audience get your books?
My books are all on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles.
We'd love to have you back on sometime too, because there's plenty more to talk about.
Well, yeah, definitely. I definitely would love to come back on. Yeah, all the stories I wrote in prison, they're all super interesting.